Namaste. Hello and welcome to Nepali NAATI. Today we will discuss about the NAATI CCL exam, then we will go through the exam format in depth. In my previous video I did explain about the exam but only briefly. So let's start going. First of all, what is NAATI CCL? NAATI, N-A-A-T-I. NAATI stands for National Accreditation Authority for Translators and Interpreters, whereas CCL stands for Community Credential Language. Why do we give NAATI CCL exam anyway, or why do we need to do it? Well, if you pass the NAATI CCL exam, you get 5 points towards your permanent residency. If you pass just the NAATI exam, not the NAATI CCL, the original NAATI exam, let's say, then you are also able to work as an interpreter or as a translator. However, NAATI has brought this new exam pattern which is called CCL, Community Credential Language, under which if you pass the exam, you do get 5 points. Is the other diploma level NAATI. However, you're not allowed to work as a professional interpreter or as a translator, unlike the NAATI diploma exam where you would be able to claim 5 points and work as a interpreter and as a translator as well. So the exam that I passed was the diploma level exam, and nowadays there is no diploma. I believe you can still give the exam, but why would you spend $4,000, $5,000 for the diploma level instead of giving the NAATI CCL, which is probably around $1,000. Alright, now let's talk about the exam. What is NAATI CCL? What does it involve? What do we need to do? How long the exam lasts for? How do we get a score? How much do we need to pass? And all the other details. NAATI CCL exam is basically an interpreting examination where you have to deal with two languages, one being the English and one your native language, native mother tongue language. So for Nepali NAATI, we will have to interpret from English to Nepali, and from Nepali to English, both languages. The exam duration is about 30 minutes, and in the examination room, there is only one student present at the time. So this is similar to IELTS speaking, but not PT speaking. In PT speaking section, PT examination, Pearson test of English, we have 8 to 10 students in the examination hall, in the room, but in IELTS it's only one person and the assessor. So here also it's the same. There's only one student in the examination room, although there might be more examination room being used, so there might be 6 to 7 tests being conducted at the same time. However, in one room only one student. And another difference from the IELTS speaking test is that here the testing officer in the examination room with you does not ask you any question, and most likely does not understand or speak your native language as well. So the testing officer is there not to assess you, but only to play and pause the video. Alright, your score is assessed by 2 different assessors. Your answers are recorded and sent to 2 different persons, where they calculate the score independently and an average is calculated. So the testing officer is not involved in scoring your exam at all. The audios that you hear are all recorded, so there is not a person asking you questions. You hear recorded audios and your audios are recorded as well. Alright, having said that, okay, so I did mention previously that the exam duration is 30 minutes approximately. This depends on the students as well. Some students tend to finish the exam a bit early, they maybe they speak at a faster speed, or they tend to take notes a bit faster, or they do not hesitate for some reasons. For these reasons, some students tend to finish exam earlier. So for some of them it's 20 minutes, for some it's 25, and for some it's 30 minutes. So let's say, around this 25 to 30 minutes time frame. All right, in the CCL examination, only interpretation is required. There is no translation required, so you don't need to write anything. However, since you need to take notes, there is a little bit of note taking involved. So you are provided with paper in the exam, but make sure you do bring your pen and paper with you just in case, and take at least a couple of pens, just to be on the safe side. And now let's go to the test format, right? That's all about the test. You just need to take your pen and paper with you, and the exam lasts for 30 minutes. Now let's talk about the more important thing, which is the test format. Okay, so in the 30 minutes exam duration, there are 2 dialogues. You listen to 2 dialogues, and remember, in our daily life, when we say dialogues, we think of one sentence, right? This is not one sentence. This is, think of it as a topic. Dialogue 1 is based on one topic. Dialogue 2 is based on different topics. So you hear dialogues that have 2 different topics, all right? Dialogue 1 and dialogue 2. So dialogue 1 consists of less than 300 words, and dialogue 2 also less than 300 words. The format of dialogue 1 and dialogue 2 is pretty much the same, so I'll only explain for one dialogue. All right, so there are less than equal to 300 words in dialogue 1 altogether, but you will not hear all these words at once. The audio file is divided into segments. All right, segments. So each segment has up to 35 words, a maximum of 35 words for each segment. And there are about 8 to 12 different segments in the exam. So one segment is actually one audio file that you listen to. Let's say, for example, if a Nepali speaker says something, right? He greets, for example, he says, "Supraprabhat, तपाईलाई कस्तो छ, आइदिनु भएकोमा धन्यवाद." So this is one segment. Now you have to interpret into English. Now whatever the English speaker responds, that's another segment, right? So that's segment number 2. So like that, it goes from segment 1 to segment 2, and the segments alternate each other, meaning you hear you hear the English speaker first, you interpret, and then you hear the Nepalese speaker, then you interpret, and then you go back to English, right? So it's back and forth, basically exchange of dialogues that you need to interpret as well. All right, now let's talk about the scores. All right, so the exam is scored out of 90. The full marks is 90, 45 marks for dialogue 1 and 45 for dialogue 2. And you need to score at least 29 in both dialogues. All right, remember, dialogue 1, you finish dialogue 1, then you go to dialogue 2, and you have to get at least 29 out of 45 to pass the exam. That is one criteria. The next criteria is that overall you must score 63.5 out of 90 to pass. So for example, if I score 29 and 30, 29 dialogue 1 and 30 in dialogue 2, I get 59, right? So I actually passed the exam on a dialogue basis individually, but overall my marks was not 63.5, it was only 59, so 4.5 marks less. So I actually failed the exam in that case. On the other hand, let's say I scored 45 out of 40 in dialogue 1, right? Then I scored 20 in dialogue 2. That's 65, which is 1.5 marks more than the overall pass mark, but I still failed because in dialogue 2 I scored 20. All right, so you need to satisfy 2 criteria. Criteria number 1, you need to pass in each dialogue, which is 29 out of 45. Criteria number 2, you need to get an overall of 63.5 out of 90. So think about it as an IELTS, ESPAN, and overall score. That will make it much clearer. All right, and in each segment you get less than 35 words. So when I hear a sentence, when I hear an audio, maybe it's the Nepalese speaker, maybe it's the English speaker, the speaker does not say more than 35 words. That's the limit, right? So it could be 15, could be 20, could be 25, could be 35. Of course, the longer the segment, the more the marks it has. So I think on average it's close to 30. Sometimes it might be shorter, but most of the segments are close to 30 words on average. Alright, now let's talk about instructions. What kind of instruction do you listen to in the exam? So the instruction will say, you will hear two dialogues between an English speaker and a Nepali speaker. You are required to interpret into the other language what each speaker says as soon as the speaker finishes a segment and you hear the signal. You may take notes if you wish. You should begin interpreting only a few seconds after you hear the signal. So these instructions, you cannot read it, right? It is not given to you in a piece of paper. This is what you listen to before the dialogue begins. Now let's focus on the last sentence. It is important. So the last sentence says, you should begin interpreting only a few seconds after you hear the signal. So it means that when the speaker stops speaking for that segment, right? When you hear one segment, you hear a chime. It's a kind of a sound that tells you that the microphone is opened. The recording has started actually. So, but if you start interpreting before you hear this signaling sound, then that will not be recorded, right? You will not get marks for that. So you have to wait to hear the signal, which is, there is not a long gap. It's I think it's less than a second. And once you hear the signal, the chime, then you need to start interpreting. Now, the last sentence says that you need to start interpreting only a few seconds after. So once you hear the chime, once you hear the signal, then wait 3 to 5 seconds before you start interpreting. It is actually better to wait because it helps us to reorganize ourselves, go through our notes, think about the topic, think about who said this information to who, and try to translate some vocabs that we might not know of, that might be a bit difficult, so we can work on it in 3 to 5 seconds, then start interpreting. But please bear in mind that do not take more than 5 seconds. If there is a long pause, then you will lose marks as well. So 3 to 5 seconds is a pretty good time frame. Okay, now let's talk about scenario. So scenario basically means the topic. What is the topic of your exam? So after you hear the instruction, you'll also hear about the scenario. So for this video, the scenario is that this dialogue takes place between a welfare officer at the Immigrant Women's Support Service, Miss Clark, and a Nepali-speaking client, Mr. Thapa. Alright, so when you hear the scenario, quickly write down the name of persons involved. Very important because the names will be repeated, and also write down the job titles. For example, welfare officer. Some keywords such as service, support, client. These things, write it down in English and in Nepali as well, as these keywords will most likely be repeated throughout. For example, officer, we can say adhikari, adhikrit, service, seva, client, grahak, support, sahayata. Okay, so make sure you write these words down before you start hearing the dialogue. All right. Again, you will not read a written piece for the scenario. Everything is a part of the audio. Okay, now let's listen to the indicator sound that I was mentioning about previously. Okay, that's it. So that sound means that you need to start interpreting. And as I said previously, make sure after you hear this sound, you wait 3 to 5 seconds before you start interpreting. All right. Okay, now let's move on to the segments. So these are the segments from dialogue 1 for our video. So let's go back to the context, the topic. So dialogue 1 was based on Miss Clark, who is a Nepali speaking client and who goes to a welfare officer at the immigrant women support, who is Miss Clark. So basically this is segment 1 of the dialogue, of the first dialogue. This is segment 2, segment 3, segment 4. That's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So we have 10 segments. So if you count the number of words in all these segments, it will not exceed 35. So that's what I was trying to say before. So each segment not more than 35 words. It could be one sentence, or it could be 2 sentences. It could be even more than that. As you can see, the first segment has 2 sentences. Good morning, Mrs. Thapa. I understand that the police referred you to us because you were the victim of domestic violence from your husband. So in this sentence, right, so there is not a gap after you hear this sentence. This is like one continuous audio. So once the audio comes to here, the word husband, then there is a indicator sound, which is a chime, and then you wait 3 to 5 seconds, then you interpret the sentence into English. Then once the testing officer sees that you have finished interpreting the sentence, he plays the next sentence for you. So the next sentence will be Nepalese. So it's alternate back and forth. English to Nepali, Nepali to English, so it goes back and forth. So once you finish all the segments, then the audio will say this is the end of dialogue 1, then next dialogue 2, this is the context, and then you start interpreting again for dialogue 2. There is no gap between dialogue 1 and dialogue 2. And one more important thing that I would like to highlight is that once you finish interpreting this segment, this one particular segment, you don't need to tell the testing officer that, okay, I'm done, can you please start the next segment. Please do not do that. You might lose marks for that. The testing officer will definitely notice that you have finished interpreting, and he or she will start the next segment by himself or herself. Right? Okay, now that I've explained about the dialogues, about the 4 marks and everything, let's listen to an actual dialogue. Let's listen to how the audio proceeds. Okay.
National Accreditation Authority for Translators and Interpreters. Credential Community Language Practice Test. Please use these practice materials.
So here it talks about practice tests and says please use these practice materials in a certain way. You will not hear this in the exam. You're hearing this here because this is a practice material. Alright, let's listen.
In conjunction with the information provided in the practice test booklet.
English, Nepali. Dialogue interpreting. You will hear 2 dialogues between an English speaker and a Nepali speaker. You are required to interpret into the other language what each speaker says as soon as each speaker finishes a segment and you hear this signal. You may take notes if you wish. You should begin interpreting only a few seconds after you hear the signal.
Okay, so that was the instruction. Alright, now let's listen to the context.
Dialogue 1. This dialogue takes place between a welfare officer at the Immigrant Women's Support Service, Miss Clark, and a Nepali-speaking client, Mrs. Thapa. The dialogue begins now.
Okay, now that was the scenario being played. And remember, I paused these instruction and scenarios all the way. You will not be able to pause it. It's continuous. Then once you hear the speaker say the dialogue begins now, then that's from where you need to start interpreting. Do not interpret anything mentioned before that, okay? You do not need to interpret the dialogues. You do not need to interpret the scenario. Sorry, you do not need to interpret the scenario. You only interpret the dialogues. Okay, let's listen to the first dialogue.
Good morning, Mrs. Thapa. I understand that the police referred you to us because you were the victim of domestic violence from your husband.
Okay, so the sentence was, "Good morning, Mrs. Thapa. I understand that the police referred you to us because you were the victim of domestic violence from your husband." So once you hear this, then again you hear the chime, then you have to start interpreting. Then you will say, शुभ प्रभात श्रीमती थापाज्यू, म बुझ्दछु कि तपाईलाई प्रहरीले हामी कहाँ सिफारिस गरेको हो किनकि तपाईँ आफ्नो श्रीमानद्वारा घरेलु हिंसाको पीडित हुनुभएको थियो. Okay, that's it. So once I end the sentence, I will pause for definitely 2-3 seconds, and that's the testing officer will see that I have finished interpreting for the segment, then he will play the next segment for me. And that's how the exam progresses. I finish dialogue 1, then I go to dialogue 2, then I finish dialogue 2, then the exam is done. Okay, now let's talk about another important topic, which is repetition and rephrasing. Very, very important. I get this question all the time. How many repetitions can I take, or am I allowed any repetitions at all? Yes, you are allowed repetitions, but only one repetition per dialogue. Means that you can ask for one segment to be repeated. If you did not hear anything properly, you can ask the officer to repeat the segment one more time for you. So you can do that once for dialogue 1, and you can do that once for dialogue 2 as well, without losing any mark whatsoever. However, if you ask for additional repetitions, then you start losing marks. Alright, so if I'm asking for 3 repetitions, I lose 2 marks for the 2 extra repetitions that I asked for. So taking repetitions is actually a good idea if you ask me, even though you're able to catch all the information, because it gives you extra time to think and trying to interpret the sentence before you need to start to repeat the sentence into the microphone. Okay, then the next topic is rephrasing. Rephrasing also another important point that we need to know before going to the CCL exam. Rephrasing is actually allowed as well. Rephrasing is basically starting the sentence again, right? So you're not asking for the audio to be repeated, but you're just rephrasing again. Why do we need to rephrase? Well, sometimes with any, even native speaker, anything, we tend to become hesitant. Maybe we start with the wrong word. Sometimes, happens even if you're speaking casually, talking casually with your friends. So, and we start again, right? So, rephrasing are considered. That's okay. You can, but do not do it many times. But before you do that, you need to say something like, okay, for example, let's say the segment that I'm trying to interpret has 3 sentences. Then maybe I messed up the last sentence. Then I can say, I would like to rephrase the last sentence, and then you can start rephrasing the last sentence. You don't need to ask for the testing officer's permission. Remember, he is there just to play and pause the audio. All right. So just say, maybe I interpret the first sentence. I hesitated in the last sentence for the one segment. Then I'll say, I would like to rephrase the last sentence. Then I start over again. Now, do I lose marks for rephrasing? I actually don't lose a lot of marks. Maybe I get, let's say, 4.5 out of 5 or 4 out of 5, which is pretty good. Well, given that rephrasing helped me to convey the message. On the other hand, if it did not, then it will just be a useless attempt. All right. Let's move to the next point, which is the scoring guide. Now, I explained about scoring guide a little bit earlier as well, where I mentioned that this total score is 90. You need to get 63.5 with 29 in each dialogue to pass. Now, how do you lose marks? Okay, how do you get marks or lose marks? So you lose marks for distortion of meaning, which is the most important thing in NAATI interpretation is CCL is distortion of meaning. Now, no one can interpret word by word. Again, this is another question that I get all the time, is that do I need to interpret everything word by word? Because it is impossible. It is impossible. There are up to 35 words in a segment. I don't think anyone can interpret everything word by word for all segments in both dialogues. So the the basis here is to be able to facilitate communication between two individuals who do not understand each other. That's why it is called interpretation, right? So you're interpreting the meaning from one language to the other language. Now, as long as you have conveyed the message properly, you will pass the exam. You may pass the exam even with some insertions or deletions. On the other hand, let's say you've mentioned all the words, but the meaning was opposite that you mentioned. All right. For example, let's say there is a dialogue conversation between a nurse and a patient, and the nurse says to the patient that he or she needs to, let's say, take bed rest for 3 days. Then you told the patient he or she does not need to take the bed rest for 3 days. So basically you're saying all the verses in it, right? But you added extra, which is does not, do not, and this actually will significantly change the meaning, because now the patient will understand he or she does not need to take bed rest and can go home. Then even though I repeated everything, I interpreted everything, I will lose a lot of marks because of distortion of meaning. Okay, so there should not be distortion of meaning. Maybe you could not interpret everything, but still try to maintain the essence, try to maintain the meaning. And insertion, omissions, if you add anything, if you do not interpret anything, you do lose marks for that, but not as much as for distortion. And also grammar, voice clarity, and register also form a minor part of it. You do not lose a lot of marks for grammar, voice clarity, and register, but you do lose a little bit of marks, like say 0.5 and something like that. Voice clarity is actually important. I would assume that most of us have a clear voice. If you do not, then the person, the assessor might not understand what you're trying to say and might give you less marks. It's not like that, you will be given a second chance, or someone will call you and ask you what were you trying to say in the 10th second, or say in the 15th, 20th second, right? They just try to understand. If it is not understandable, it's not their fault that they could not understand. It's your fault, right? That your voice is not clear. So be careful with that as well. And register is basically the context. For example, when you're talking to someone younger, when you're talking to someone older, when you're talking in an office, when you're talking with a friend casually, what kind of language register do you use, right? Basically, we have some words that mean respect in Nepali, so something related with it. Again, I will explain about it in later videos, but not in this video since we don't have enough time. Okay, so once everything's done, exam's done, right? Scoring, everything's done. We finally come down to results, and the question is, how long does it take to get results? There is not a fixed answer. It can take you anywhere from 4 weeks to a couple of months as well. It is a lengthy process for NAATI. I don't know why, but it does take a lot of time. So please make sure you plan ahead. Give yourself at least 2-3 months or even more if you want to claim 5 points from NAATI. All right, I'll have to stop our introduction to that much for today, and thank you so much for watching this video. If you like this video, if you found this video useful, if you think you learned something about the NAATI CCL exam, please make sure you hit the like and subscribe button down below. It helps us spread the news and reach to other potential YouTube viewers and students. And please make sure you visit our Facebook page, www.facebook.com/Nepali NAATI, and you could also go to our website, www.nepalinati.com. If you want to buy some practice materials, we've got thousands of words, vocabs, which are separated topic-wise. For example, legal, car insurance, separated topic-wise vocabs, and we have dialogues in both audio file format and in PDF file format as well, where you can practice by yourself at home as well. And you can also get online mock tests. So you can do a mock test, a quick half-an-hour mock test, and see how much score you might get. So you can do that by visiting our website nepalinaati.com. Thank you for watching this video. यो भिडियो हेरिदिनु भएकोमा धेरै धेरै धन्यवाद. I will see you guys in the next video. Have a nice day. Thank you.